Hello, hello. I recently came out as autistic on the internet. Yay! And I just wanted to say that sharing that was the result of an incredibly long journey. And I was so nervous to share that publicly for so many reasons. And the amount of support I received on that video, that so many of you faced similar struggles and trauma and can relate with the neurodivergent feels. I feel so honored by that, and I just want to thank you so much for that. I'm sorry this Q&A took forever. It's 2020. We're in a pandemic. Creating things this year has not been easy, but here we are, finally, with another video. Let's get to it. I collected comments from my last video and from over on Instagram, which, by the way, if you don't follow me on there, you should. And that's it. I really want to get through as many as I can. So this will be a bit of a long one, but I'll timestamp the questions in the description for easier navigation. And okay, I took my meds. I got my water. Let's begin. Do you have autistic relatives? Yes, my sister is autistic. She got diagnosed pretty early on. And I also have some relatives who are suspected but not diagnosed, and they just go by neurodivergent. I just realized that for a lot of people, this is all entirely new, so I'll just go over the vocab words really quickly. So neurodivergent is someone with a neurological difference to the typical. So this is inclusive of autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, mental illnesses, etc. And neurotypical is someone who does not have a neurodivergence. Hope that helped. What's it like having an autistic sibling? Do you have better communication? We actually really do, and always have. My sister has a really tough time communicating verbally. And since I was little, I've kind of played the role of interpreter. She speaks in like very short sentences with few words, and it leaves a lot of people confused. But I've always been able to make out the majority of what she intends to say. For the most part, there are times that it's hard for me too. But her and I can sit and have full-blown conversations, and our bedrooms are separated by a wall. But we text each other all the time. We get it. Also, I'm familiar with her special interests, and some of them are also my special interests. So we bond really well over that. Her and I are like, we're best friends. So yeah, we communicate really well. We get along really well. Why do you call yourself autistic versus a person with autism? I've actually discussed this in a previous video, which I will link up here somewhere as well as in the description below. But it's not just autism. I also identify as disabled rather than a person with a disability, though I don't really care if you call me that, but I prefer the first. The difference is referred to as IFL versus PFL, which is identity first language versus person first language. Disability is one of, if not the only identifier that comes to mind where people demand that we separate the person from it. So this sends a message that there is a cause for this separation, as though disability is a bad thing, something that dehumanizes a person, and therefore we must remind people that we are people first. But if you notice, we don't demand this of other identifiers. I can say I am gay, not I'm a person who experiences homosexuality, or I am Latinx, not I'm a person with a Latin American background. There is an understanding that the identifier comes with personhood. I don't need to separate them. It's okay to call myself what I am. I am gay. I am Latinx. I am disabled. I'm very handsome. And I'm autistic. I wouldn't think you're autistic. I'm not saying that you're not. Everyone can relate, specifically to the anxiety part. This comment reminded me of one of the reasons communication became such a special interest of mine. A couple of things happened for me when I read this comment. At first, I got defensive. I interpreted this as invalidating. Then I checked my defensiveness and reminded myself that good old imposter syndrome would make me feel that way. But then I remembered that once upon a time, I said almost the same thing to an autistic person, and I genuinely meant it. I'm stopping myself in the middle to say, I'm sharing this just so you can kind of get a peek into my brain and how I dissect dialogue and dissect communication in order to help me socialize better. While grouped together, the sentences might appear to have invalidating implications. The way I said it, every sentence existed on their own, as if I hadn't said the others. They aren't sewn together to make one point. They are on separate sheets of paper. They are not an essay or even bullet points. They are not connected. They are just freehand thoughts on separate sheets of paper. So, truth. I didn't assume you were autistic when I met you. Truth. I'm not saying you aren't, aka, I believe you. And then a thought, and it's just like a random, disconnected thought. Everyone can relate, everyone has anxiety. And so the intention of that third one is to make one feel less isolated, to relate, to console. I had to learn this, so I'm passing on the message. Thinking everyone experiences something may not feel like you're intending to invalidate someone, but it can come off that way. Because you might really think that everyone experiences it. But really, what you might actually be saying is that you experience it. And yes, maybe you're around others who can relate to elements of it, but it's not true to say that these chronic experiences and neurodivergence are a part of every single person's experience. I have disabling chronic pain, and I'll get told, but everyone has pain all the time, during a dialogue attempting to convince me that I don't actually need my mobility aids, but no, not everyone is in pain, and definitely not in enough pain for it to be physically disabling. So if you are in that amount of pain, maybe it's time to get that checked out and not project your internalized ableism onto me. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is exactly what happened here with this comment. It is entirely possible that I overanalyzed. Probably the most likely thing. That happens to me quite a bit. But if it resonates, I hope I've given you something to consider. What are some ways you learned how to mask? Mostly studying media really heavily. And the people in my surroundings as I assume most people do. Whenever I share how I learned the American accent, for the same reason that I learned how to mask, because of abuse, I have mentioned how I would watch Clueless every day to try to copy the California dialect. Then I studied phonetics through theater training, and so my voice landed somewhere in the middle, and I tend to call my accent like American theater dialect for the most part, with a tiny hint of Miami Latino accent that most people cannot notice, but I can. And people with like finely attuned ears can. And theater training plus psychology studies? Oof. Being in high school and getting to study college level psychology was everything to me. What I did on that last question, how I marked the intention of each sentence, that was a combination of the two. In acting classes, we were specifically shown how the same sentence can mean so many different things depending on your vocal tone, the shape of your face, and your body language. So for me, physically and cognitively takes so much energy because it feels like performing musical theater all the time. When I'm speaking, I'm singing. My face and my body are dancing. Y'all, it's hard. It's a whole choreographed song and dance. Communicating in neurotypical culture feels like speaking a second language. So when my voice and my face fall flat, it means I've got nothing left in me. What is stimming? Stimming refers to self-stimulating behavior. Stim, stimulation. But I often think of it more as like self-soothing or self-regulating behavior, and it usually involves repetitive movements or sounds. And I don't really want to like recreate my stims on camera for the sake of this video. They happen naturally, but so things like humming, rocking, jumping, spinning, how I'm swiveling in my chair right now, tapping. Then there are like visual stims, like watching slime or sand cutting, lava lamps. It's these soothing elements, often sensory soothing elements, that are often done in response to overstimulation, and it can help to soothe overstimulation and to process things. I get physical and oral stims from situations where I'm having energy bursts. I'm not sure how to describe that to someone who doesn't experience it, but my body feels like a rocket launch with nowhere to go. So for stuff like that, I have hand flapping, finger tapping, fidget spinners, and most commonly stim singing, like singing my dialogue. And honestly, that's my favorite stim of mine. It feels really good. It's very soothing for me. Like whenever you can see, I will do it whenever I'm super excited or if I'm really angry about something. When I start to sing my dialogue, it's part of how I regulate myself, how I calm myself down. I often use sound sensory for my stims, like certain styles of ASMR. I like water sounds like sprays, and hair washing sounds, things like that. But I can also stim to very loud music, like blasting the car radio, and I feel the sound vibrations all over my body. That's something that I would do when I used to go to the doctor a lot, and I experienced very high anxiety before, during, and after doctor's appointments. So the way I would calm myself down would be to like blast music and stim in that way. Yeah. Oh, and I also like compression as well, like being hugged with consent, of course, and a lightly weighted blanket. Or it doesn't have to be weighted, just a regular blanket is heavy enough. Yeah, the heavier blankets tend to crush my joints, and that's pretty painful. How does one get a diagnosis? I will definitely go over a couple ways to get a diagnosis, but first, I want to take you through the process of deciding if it is worth it to you to pursue a diagnosis as an autistic adult. Or this might go for you if you plan to pursue one for an autistic child, but I will be specifically speaking to marginalized adults seeking a diagnosis. So first, the financial costs. If you have insurance, you'll want to ask your primary physician about seeing a psychiatrist. Then you will have to see how much an appointment would cost. Then how much assessment would cost through your insurance company, and that is if they will cover it. With some insurances, you can skip the referral and seek out a professional psychiatrist yourself. So check with your insurance company to see if you even need that referral from your PCP. If you do not have insurance, you would have to pay for these out of pocket, and more likely than not, have to crowdfund for it. Also, I would suggest seeking out professionals in your area or one that you have access to that you can get to who have a good reputation regarding diagnosing autistic adults, women, trans, people of all genders, people of color, people with other disabilities, and so on. A lot of them don't, which makes this hard. And the dismissal and gaslighting that may occur in these spaces due to these biases, plus the money that is being spent to experience this, may be traumatic. Particularly being undiagnosed is such a vulnerable and traumatic state as it is. But add to that the financial costs, the physical labor, the anxiety and internalized ableism that must be overcome to even begin to seek professional diagnosis. It's a lot. Think about what it is that you would actually gain from a formal diagnosis. What are you looking for? Therapy, medication to co-occurring conditions like anxiety, academic aid, financial aid? What outcome or resources are you seeking? There are also some scary things that come out of professional diagnoses because of ableism and governments being ableist and stuff like that. I don't want to say any of that to be discouraging. I want you to be sure that a professional diagnosis is something you absolutely need and something that you are willing to move through fire to get, because that's what it might take. My loves, if this is not you, self-diagnosis is an option. I don't want any more undiagnosed autistic folks, undiagnosed autistic adults, undiagnosed autistic kids to die at their own hands because they didn't know what was going on in their minds, or were trying to fit in a neurotypical world without any way to make it more accessible to them. No, sir. I'm going to talk you through it. Self-diagnosis is not what a lot of people make it out to be. There's such immense confusion about that. A lot of people think that self-diagnosis is the same thing as when people appropriate disability language. A common one would be like when people say, "Oh, I'm such a neat freak, I'm so OCD." Which is appropriating the language, right? And it's making light of it, it's very casual. That's not okay. We don't like that. Self-diagnosis comes out of necessity, out of survival. It's not like you read a list or take one quiz and bam, there you go, you self-diagnose. Most people who I know who have self-diagnosed took so long to feel comfortable with claiming it. It takes a lot of research and verifying symptoms/traits. I'll go ahead and link some resources for you in the description for that. A lot of time talking to community members about shared experiences and receiving affirmations. In my previous video, I talked about the trauma of being undiagnosed. And prior to that, I spent quite a few videos over the years documenting my journey to my EDS diagnosis, and have also discussed how traumatic that experience was. There are so many barriers, from not being able to afford diagnosis to healthcare professionals who have personal biases like sexism, racism, ableism, etc., that deny someone their rightful diagnosis. Again, I don't want to be discouraging when I say this, I just want to be factual and give you the warning that no one gave me. It's not fair, and it's not an easy path. Professional diagnosis is a privilege that not everyone has access to. But we are a community, and we are here to support one another however we can. Please seek out resources on this beyond me. And like I said, if you are planning on seeking professional diagnosis, prepare yourself, because it is quite the process and possibly traumatizing. So get your battle armor on and look for trustworthy professionals that you have access to. And if you're considering trying to self-diagnose, take it seriously. Seek out multiple resources, studies, questionnaires, and of course, trusted community members to talk to about it. Search for coping tools and accessibility and try them out and see if they help you. Then decide if identifying yourself as autistic, or maybe you discover it's actually a different diagnosis that fits you. Decide if identifying yourself that way is affirming and helpful to how you navigate the world going forward. Does your physical disability affect how you experience your autism? The first thing I'll say is I know a lot of people with both. A lot of people with both EDS, why did I say it like that? EDS and autism. And I've read a couple different pieces about how research is being done to see how they're connected because so many people have both. But besides that, my first thought is how my physical disabilities affect my stimming. I used to flap my wrists when I was younger, and now my wrists are very fragile, but the instinct is still there. So sometimes I make fists while flapping because then the weight of my hand doesn't tug on the wrist. There are so many little things to be cautious about when all your joints are fragile, and that's one of them. Have you ever experienced meltdowns? Yes. In fact, a RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, meltdown, last year is what inspired me to finally start therapy. And it's been going great. What's something you think is really cool about your autism? I can't say for certain, but I think autism affects how I interact with sound. And I personally love how I interact with sound. Not when I'm overstimulated, obviously, but I like being able to echo things perfectly and remember things because of how they sound, and being very precise with musical pitch and harmonies. And it's even helped with my vocal masking when I speak. Yeah, like how I mentioned earlier that like I experience speaking like singing because I can hear inflections, and inflections in my mind, the way I compute them to get them out of my mouth, is very similar to how I compute music and singing notes. Again, I'm not entirely sure about how much of that is related to my autism specifically, but is there something that makes conversations / emails more accessible to you? I think my favorite tech communication accessibility is captioned video calls. And then second to that would be audio phone calls, which is not accessible when I'm having audio processing difficulties. But besides that, I don't feel the pressure to make sure my face is doing the right thing the entire time, which makes things easier. Texting and audio messages are great as long as communication is clear. And in emails, I often need things to be pretty concise, or I may get lost if there's just like too much text. Keep things short, sweet, simple, have spaces between subject changes. All that's pretty helpful for me. What do you wish strangers would be more conscious of? Maybe audio processing difficulties and trouble with names and faces. People are very unforgiving about a lot of things like that. They take it very personally, and it's really not. It's just how my brain works. Also, I've said this before, but trying to give us the benefit of the doubt if we sometimes say inappropriate things. Communicating clearly about how something that was said or done made you feel, because we may be extremely oblivious to it. And that sucks so much. I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I find it really hard when folks are mad at me and not knowing what I did wrong. I think that might go for anyone, of course. But when you've worked so hard to learn how to communicate and get along well with others, stuff like that can make one feel like such a failure. It sucks. Advice for teachers? I'm assuming you mean teachers of autistic students. And I guess I would probably say get to know some autistic adults and learn how to be a good ally to autistic people and about the things that you might think are helpful but might actually be hurtful to autistic people. And this goes for parents of autistic children as well. All right. This has been a lot. It is late, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I've gone up and down with my vocal tone throughout this video because my voice gets very low when I get tired, and then I would drink some water, and then my voice would go up again. I'm sorry if that was disorienting at any point. But in general, I hope this helped or entertained or did something for you. Leave me a comment and let me know if you found any of this interesting. Subscribe if you have not. And I will see you eventually. Bye.